Everyone, welcome to HR Tech Talk today. I'm Ben Eubanks, your host, and I'm so glad to have you today. As you can tell, right here, we've got their logo up. We're going to be talking to the team at Headspace. We're going to dig into what they do, how they are serving not just employers, but individuals across the world. It's really a neat conversation. I'm excited to dive into it as I am getting Lindsay up for the discussion, who's going to chat with me today. Go ahead, if you're listening in, chime in, let us know where you're connecting from. Go ahead and just pop that in the comments there so we know who we're hearing from. And as always, if you've got questions as we're going through, we're going to do our very best. I've got a couple things I want to ask her about that I'm curious about what they're doing. But if you've got questions you want answered, go ahead and pop that into the chat as well, and we can try to bring those into the discussion as part of the show today. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and bring Lindsay up. Hey, welcome.
Hello, thanks. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Let's get you a little closer. There we go. We can see us. Perfect.
Great.
All right. So I'm pumped about this discussion. I'm just excited to dig into this today. So before we dive into the nerdy tech stuff, which we'll get to, the data, science, all the other things, tell us a little more about who you are and what you do.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm Lindsay Crittenden, and I run partner success at Headspace, and particularly working with our enterprise customers on everything related to corporate culture, mindfulness in the workplace, best practices, and for anyone who doesn't know what Headspace does, is we're a mindfulness and meditation app. Our mission is to improve the health and happiness of the world, so not without some ambition. And so here today to just talk about our employers and what we do with them and how we might be helpful.
Well, I'm glad you cast that vision for how you're going to impact the world. It's a really, really small vision, right?
No big deal.
Goodness gracious. It's a big net to cast, but
it is.
It's probably exciting to get up in the morning trying to tackle something that's going to solve that problem.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Well, awesome. So just to get us kind of eased into this, for those of us that don't know what Headspace is, I'm aware of that, but for those people in the audience that don't know who Headspace is, what the company does, how it works, talk about Headspace for Work.
Yeah. So thanks for that. Headspace for Work is, well, let me tell you a little bit about the history. So Headspace, a meditation app launched about 10 years ago, basically created this category of meditation and mindfulness, tools kind of on your phone. And from the very beginning, there were companies that were reaching out saying, hey, could you help our teams or help our employees? And, could you come and speak? Could you come and, could they get access to the app? And, for years and years, as you're growing a really big tech company, you have to focus and prioritize. And so it wasn't until a couple of years ago when the company decided to say, yeah, let's actually focus on helping employers. And so we primarily, everyone who works with us, they get access to our app, but then we also have a full suite of wraparound services and programming so that our HR professionals are not just left to try and figure out how to deploy mindfulness in their workplace alone, but really have a partner. Have a partner to help you kind of get from point A to point B.
Awesome. Well, wonderful. So one of the things that as I was thinking through what I want to talk to you about, I got a chance to ask you anything in the world.
Yeah.
And one of the things I was really curious about is what you've seen this year, right? Headspace isn't brand new, but this year probably looks different for you like it did for everybody. And I'm curious if that means because people are thinking more about just mental health in general, people are thinking about well-being, if that has meant more conversations, more opportunity. I'm just kind of curious how that's impacted you and what you've seen so far.
Absolutely. I think as you and I were kind of talking about earlier, any secular trend that was happening with regard to people in the world has gone from 0 to 60. And so before COVID and the coronavirus crisis, we were seeing an uptick in employers' kind of investment in mental health as part of kind of a perk. So kind of like a gym membership. But then after, COVID really hit in the beginning, kind of the first quarter of the year, all of a sudden the conversation with both prospects and our existing partners was, oh no, the only thing we can really do for our employees right now is to invest in their mental health. And we don't have a strategy. The best strategy most people had deployed up until that point is having an EAP that people sometimes would call and sometimes not. Maybe 1% to 2% of employees might ever even access an EAP. And so what has happened is that the nature of our conversations have changed pretty dramatically. And of course, we've had, I think a 500% increase in the number of, companies that are reaching out to us since before the crisis. And what we're hearing is, in addition to mental health becoming more of a strategic priority, it's actually just our HR partners have needed guidance on what to do. It's not like anyone in the whole world has ever dealt with with this circumstance, and that's what makes it unique. But what we found is we've just been able to partner on a lot of different things. Like, what does mindfully returning to the workplace look like? What does compassionate management, compassionate leadership look like now when employees are under such a tremendous amount of stress? So we're just hearing that people are really open to new ideas and they're really looking for solutions, because everything we've been doing before just isn't going to work in these circumstances.
I love that transition. Maybe it's a little late for some companies, like, oh, by the way, like, suddenly our employees' health matters.
Yeah.
I'm excited to hear that that's become more of a front conversation, or a leading conversation.
Yeah.
If we've got a little bit of budget we can carve out in our perch, or in our benefits package, maybe we'll throw that in. But now it's, how can we help people? Because we can't see them day to day. We don't know.
Yes.
I've said that for a while since this whole thing began. Like, we used to use, Lindsay shows up in the office, I see you, I wave to you, I say good morning. I use that as a crutch to assume that you are okay, that your family's okay, that you're taken care of, that you are focused. And we shouldn't have been doing that. And yet it's just, our brains are wired to do the things on autopilot, and we just made a lot of assumptions. And suddenly I can't see you anymore.
Right.
I only see, the little picture that you decided to let me see.
Exactly. Yeah. And there's so much you get out of body language too. I think that's one of the things that I've missed the most as a leader and a manager, is that our brains are really good at processing body language. And when you remove that entire thing, then you're processing a bunch of other information that traditionally you haven't. And so that kind of disconnect, I think, has been hard for most people in the workplace.
Yes. Well, you mentioned compassionate leadership a minute ago. And one of the things that I've worked for companies that were remote in the past, or that had, or had teams that were not in the same office, the same physical space. But I realized that there are some managers in the last few months that have had to manage people they can't see, and it's the first time they've ever had to do that in their entire career. Even if you've been a leader for 30 years, you suddenly manage people you can't see, and that creates a different layer of stress on them. That creates different experiences for the employees themselves, trying to report to that person that doesn't know what to expect. So many layers of challenge there.
Indeed.
Can you talk about the compassionate leadership? You mentioned that term, and I don't know if you have anything around that you've seen.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And I can check in with our team to see if one of our compassionate leadership webinars is available publicly, or maybe, we can figure out a way for your audience to kind of get access to it. The way that we think about compassionate leadership, so practicing mindfulness, which sounds probably a little woo-woo to some people. Before I was exposed to it, I thought it was that. I'm from a small town in Iowa. Mindfulness is not a word that anyone uses. But mindfulness practice, in terms of whether or not you're just being intentional and paying attention to the food you're eating, or you're meditating for 20 minutes every day, kind of on the much more involved end. What that actually does is help create empathy for other people. So you're able to understand your actions, as well as see people for who they are, and not necessarily just your perception of who they are. So you're able to kind of get out of your story about what's happening. The thing that is really great about that is, in so doing and in so practicing mindfulness and meditation, your empathy grows, which means your compassion as a leader increases. And so there is a literature out there about compassionate leadership, and how, as you practice mindfulness, you become a more compassionate leader. But in terms of what we are hearing from companies, is actually one of the most important things that companies are trying to crack, is how do we take even first-time managers, second-time managers, or people who've been managing for 30 years, how do you create a sense of compassion for the people who you work with and who report to you, in order to kind of enable some of that glue that you may not get because you're not having happy hours anymore, or you're not having team lunches, things like that.
It sounds like, I don't want to oversimplify, but it sounds almost like it's becoming other-centered versus self-centered in this, right? The mindfulness gets you to think about the needs of the other people.
Yeah. I love that characterization. One of the things that we often talk about is, it might be hard for you, Ben, to sit down for 5 minutes to meditate, but guess what? If your brain goes from fight or flight to, kind of settling down, your prefrontal cortex spends a little more time on, like, your partner is probably going to appreciate it. And you mentioned you have children at home. Your children are going to see the benefit of your ability to just be present and kind of have more control over your stress levels. So even if you're not doing it for yourself all the time, doing it for them and your dinner conversation it is proven to be really helpful. Actually, the science shows it.
So you said science, but you also said woo woo earlier, and
Yeah.
that's a very scientific term. I want to bring that back.
Right.
So let's say that I am a skeptic of this whole idea on like mindfulness, meditation. Like, okay, right, that's just a bunch of fluffy stuff. I've got real work to do.
Yep.
Any data, any science, any evidence you can use to convince me that these things actually do lead to some impact, some change, some outcome that some HR leader listening would care about?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a great question because, one of the ways that we think about impacting the business is starting with the individual, and then, helping the individual succeed helps the company succeed. And I know that we all say that. It's like, of course, impacting the individual, but it's actually really hard to talk about that and make a business case for it. And one of the things that we know about mindfulness, and by the way, I was just looking up before our call to make sure that I was giving the right numbers. We have right now we have 25 peer-reviewed studies around the impact of mindfulness in a broad array of different parts of life. But if you're one of those people who's like, I deal with my stress by running, or I don't have stress, or I don't, whatever, but I care a lot about focus, or I care a lot about productivity, there are lots of ways that mindfulness helps. So excuse me for reading, but I just want to make sure that it's right, which is, after 4 weeks of Headspace, there's a 14% increase in focus and a reduction in what's called mind wandering. So, just your brain going to something else that is, not just daydreaming, but actually might be stressful for you. So you can increase your focus, your resilience, so your ability to navigate change and uncertainty, which I think 2020 has been relentless. One of the words that one of my friends uses. After 10 days of Headspace, you could increase your resilience by almost 5%. And after 30 days, it's almost 11%. So what that means is if you, Ben, sat down and meditated maybe every day for 3 minutes, because we have meditations that are 3 minutes long, or you did a walking meditation. We have ones where if you go for a walk, you can just be prompted to be mindful about your surroundings, and you don't even have to close your eyes. But engaging in those activities actually improve your performance in the workplace, and in so doing, ideally improve your company performance. So obviously, mindfulness cannot take care of every problem that you might have inside of your organization.
Can't solve all of them, but again, let's start at the human level.
Yeah,
things, those issues all of us deal with. That gives us a chance to do that. Yes, I'd recommend not closing your eyes during the walking meditation. We had time to tell you a fun story on that one. That's probably a good tip there. Pro tip. So, one of the things that I saw in there as well, and those were some of the outcomes that were good for us. All right. Yeah. I can be more focused. I can be more productive. I don't know a single person that's listening that's not like, I want those things.
Yes. Right.
But one of the things I actually saw when I was digging through the website, prepping for the conversation today, I saw that there was one stat that said using Headspace, using the app actually increases your compassion.
It does.
That outcome, because that's not a self outcome. That's an outcome for others, right?
It is an outcome for others. So one of the, and I think what you're probably referring to is that after 3 weeks of Headspace, there's a 21% increase in compassion. So I'm going back to the compassionate leadership, going back to, compassion with the people who you live with. Right now, we're all kind of like this. And I know that if I have an argument with my children about, some Zoom call, and then I have to jump right into my own Zoom call, doing a one-on-one with someone who reports to me, I'm not sure that I'm exhibiting the most compassion that I probably could. And so increasing my capacity for compassion, I think, is one of the best things that I can do for, frankly, my colleagues, my manager, people who report to me, my children, my dog, kind of across the board.
I heard You used the word relentless. And when you just said
Yeah.
that piece a minute ago, it reminded me of the close quarters component. I heard an interview recently with the astronaut Chris Hadfield,
Ah,
the
interesting.
Canadian astronaut, and he was talking about surviving in space, which is completely relevant to the discussion right now. Just hold on a second. He said when you're in space, all you have to rely on is the preparation, everything else that you've done to lead up to this. And so
Yep.
until the moment that you launch, every opportunity you have, you're like, I've got to dig this well of knowledge as deep as and as broad as it will
Yeah.
go, because
Yeah.
I might have to do, an emergency surgery on my teammate, or I might have to fix this thing that I'm not an engineer and have to fix it. And so that whole idea is, you're saying like this. I had a good connection to that a minute ago, and now I've lost it completely. But maybe it's the relentless piece of it. Just there's always a focus. There's always something else that we can do, and maybe it's just the tie back to being relentless in our focus on increasing just your productivity or just your focus. Like there's a physical limit to those things, but increasing the compassion, that's like an exponential benefit to everybody else
It,
around you.
I totally agree. I think the other thing that I also go back to, as an astronaut, I can only imagine is just the amount of resilience you have to be able to kind of go from, oh, I'm going to perform surgery to, oh, now I need to like go out in space and take a sample of something, and I may not come back because like everything could break down and I might be done. And that's a tremendous amount of stress. It's a tremendous amount of chronic stress. And so mindfulness and kind of your ability to be resilient in the face of a lot of change is one of those things that, I mean, I know for me personally has been pretty tremendous. Being able to kind of ride the wave as opposed to just get like smashed onto the shore every time it hits you.
Getting crushed against the waves of life, or
Yeah,
the
exactly.
beach of life, I guess.
Yeah.
So one other thing, and again, I don't actually know the science behind this one, but this is a
Yeah.
logical leap for me. Meditation seems like it would make you more grateful, more thankful as a person in general.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, that's a really interesting point. And actually, it's not something you'd think that in these times that would be something that we hear questions about more often. But what is interesting is, for after about 10 days of Headspace, we've seen about a 16% increase in positivity. So it's not necessarily gratitude. I know, though, when I personally am feeling more positive and I'm looking at everything that is going on in the world and then where I am in the world, I have a much more positive outlook on life after I've been committed to mindfulness practices. And I think that one of the things, some of the companies that we've seen, really lean into the Headspace Work program most successfully are the ones where their CEO or, their CRO or the COO stands up and says, here's how I've been struggling during all of this. Here's what's mattered to me, and demonstrate, the vulnerability. And then they can talk about, I feel positive about our company because of X. They can legitimately lead from a place of compassion and a place of positivity, which, right now, especially as leaders, that's what people need kind of more than ever from you.
Yes.
It's just like really critical. And so that's one of the places where positivity is shown up for us the most with our partners.
I always make the joke at home, whatever my blood type is something positive, and I'm like, that's it's in me. Like I can't help but be positive. That's just how I'm wired. One of the things, again, you and I were talking in the show prep. One of the things that I ran across as I was doing some research recently, I wrote about this meta-analysis of 10 different studies and what they say about work right now, work going forward, how it's going to
Mm-hmm.
change at a company and a
Mm-hmm.
personal level. Lots of interesting lenses. I did cite some of the Headspace research in there because it was really
Yeah.
intriguing.
Yeah.
One of the other studies, though, that I saw in there, we're talking about these human factors right now. One of the other
Yeah.
studies in there, they said these scientists looked at what predicted someone's ability to go from old model to COVID, everything's on fire, like, let's survive this model.
Yeah.
And they were like, well, maybe it's someone's, diligence, that's how hard they work, maybe it's focus. No, it
Mm,
wasn't those things. It actually came around to their agreeableness, their willingness to think about others, to care about the needs of others,
interesting.
to be flexible and be willing to, oh, you know what? Hey, I'm glad to help you with that, or let me do
Yeah.
something to support you. It's not all
Yeah.
just about me. And so the other things we talked about today, that was the thing that
Yeah.
predicted someone's likelihood to be able to transition to the different model of work in the middle of all the things going on. And I thought that was really intriguing because there was some interesting correlation with or corollaries with the different pieces you're talking about here.
Yeah, I think so. You know what that reminds me of is actually we have a change course inside of the app where quite literally you can, do a series of, I think, up to 30 meditations or something along those lines about the different elements of change and how to go about navigating change, both through the positive and more challenging. And and that's really important. But it's also easy, I think, to I say that, but I don't want to diminish the idea that I know I have change fatigue. And there have been times, even inside of Headspace, where it's like, okay, well, we know change is constant. We know the human life, like everything is changing all the time. Like if I hear that in a meditation one more time, I'm throwing my pen across the room. And so I think it's one of those things where I'm not surprised by what you surfaced in your article. I also know there are lots of tools out there to help people, but the year has been challenging. And so you might have some change fatigue, and drawing upon all of the tools that you have, I think, is the only way to really honestly make it through everything we're going through.
You made the comment earlier about being a runner, like running helps with stress.
Yeah.
Normally that's my thing. So
Yeah.
this year has been strange though, because I've had this knee issue going on since February. And so
Oh.
until this month, just yesterday, I actually ran for the first time in a long time. And I'm alive today to tell about it. But that was always my way of handling. I've got a hard thing to think about. I've got a tough day at work. I just might let the things kind of wash away.
Yep.
And I haven't had that in 6 months. And so it was a really weird kind of thing to figure out, okay, how else can I minimize, not just minimize stress, but deal with the stress, right? It's got to be there regardless.
Yeah.
How do we deal with it? How do you get over it? How do you get through it?
Yeah.
And without just kind of, let's just bottle it all up as tightly as we can and keep on just wedging it down there. And that's going to lead to good outcomes, right? Probably not. So that's what you said that a minute ago, that popped in my head. Like I hadn't thought about it that way, but that has been, that was my way of dealing with stress and everything else. And I'm kind of thinking that I want to try some meditations after having this conversation.
Yeah. Oh, great. Yeah. I mean, great. I love to hear that. Because it is tremendously helpful. It's interesting that I'm going to take my stress and like bang it down and everything will be fine. The truth is, and there's tons of research to support this, that the body keeps a score. There's quite literally a famous book called The Body Keeps the Score, where that might work for you for a while until, you you start suffering migraines, or you have, other stress related illnesses kind of come into your life. One of the stats that I was just talking about in a presentation last week is that right now, between 75% and 90% of primary care visits, so just visits to your general doctor, are because of stress-related illness.
What's that percentage again? Give me that one more time,
Between
please.
75% and 90%. I believe this is an NIH study, and I can send you the link after. But
I was just curious. I want to make sure I heard that right.
Yeah, it's incredible. And so I think the thing is when we're talking about managers, a lot of times, and compassion, managers are really like the frontline workers in a lot of what's happening in the workplace right now. And so, if you have someone on your team or have a colleague who's just, I'm going to the doctor, don't judge them. You might actually think, oh, well, instead of them just constantly missing this annoying meeting, they might be going through a lot of stress. And this is one of the flags that, might help trigger maybe some different reaction for yourself and maybe the people around you. Again, in terms of like just trying to have more compassion with the people you work with and who work for you. I got your brain thinking.
I feel like I'm in church. I don't get my toes stepped on here and there because I'm like, how can I be more compassionate for others? How can I be more, not just I leap into action first when someone's like, hey, here's this issue. I'm like, here's solutions 1 through 10. I'll dive into those things.
Yeah.
But because that's just the way I'm wired. But I don't stop to think, do they really need me to talk? Do they need me to just sit and listen? Do they need me to, do they really need an answer? Do they just need an ear? Do they need a compassionate, response to this instead of, I'll solve your problem? And even if the practice of mindfulness, meditation, those things kind of woven together, if that approach made me or anybody else, I can't talk about everybody else's problems. I can only talk about mom.
Of course,
But
yeah.
maybe slower to respond, slower to react, not instantly jump into action, but pause before that. Even that, some change as small as that
Yes,
could lead to better outcomes in a lot of areas.
absolutely. I mean, and what you're talking about right there is awareness. So you're able to focus specifically on what the person is saying. You're hopefully able to better assess what's going on in your mind while they're saying it, and then hopefully you're just able to kind of hold the space for them. One of the things that Headspace, along with I'm sure lots of other companies, have been doing a lot of allyship training. With just trying to address all the racial structural injustices in our society. And one of the trainings that we were in, this is kind of like an offhand comment, but it was actually really helpful for our entire organization, which is if you are in a workshop and you're teaching someone something, or you ask a group of questions, or you ask them an individual question, if they sit there silently, that becomes pretty uncomfortable for most people in the room. And most people jump in after 7 seconds. But if you wait for 15 seconds, then you're much more likely to elicit a response. And they had some science to kind of back that up. And so even in what you're saying, building the habit of, okay, I'm going to be a little uncomfortable for 15 seconds, and people are going to jump in. That in and of itself is like a really practical way to just hold the space for people and kind of be aware of what's going on and focus on the people around you. Honestly, we do that from our CEO all the way down the company and have been practicing that for the last couple of months. And it's really cool. It's really cool.
It's like, I'd love to see that conversation, that meeting where it's like, you see the audio spikes, where everybody like stops for a minute to let everybody kind of get their thoughts. Like,
yeah.
That is so fun.
Yeah.
It's really intriguing though to see that connection there, because there are so many different ways this ties in. It's not just at the end of the day, the way I'm seeing this conversation and the work that you're doing, it's solving a very human problem. It's not like, okay, well, only people at this size company have that issue. Heads up, if you employ people, you likely could get some benefit out of the work that you're doing.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting that you say that is, only companies at this size, because we have a tremendous number of our companies are, fewer than 100 employees. If you think about that, if you have fewer than 100 employees and you're investing in mental health, that could be probably expensive compared to a lot of the other things that you're doing in the workplace for your employees. And what we found is that these companies are sometimes we partner with companies for many, many years. And so, for context, but some of these smaller companies, this might be one of the only benefits that they have for their employees. And the feedback that they get and how special people feel because their companies care about their mind and their personal well-being and their emotional health. I mean, we get to survey and share survey results and things like that back with our partners and the leadership of those companies. And, sometimes the quotes will bring you to tears. And I mean, quite honestly, like the impact that you can have on just focusing on the human in your workplace, no matter how big your company is, big or small, it's really meaningful. And if it means that people can come to work with one fewer rocks in their backpack, that's going to benefit you. But also, I mean, it's nice to be able to do something that's good for the world and good for the people inside of your organization. I don't know a lot of people who start businesses or lead businesses because they don't want to impact the world in a positive way. They're pretty idealistic people as far as I've been able to assess.
Yes, absolutely. I was actually, as you were talking there, we saw there were several comments that are coming in the last little bit. We're going to wrap up, but Lena said people are so used to noise. We always have some inputs, and so the silence feels uncomfortable, but that's the right answer sometimes. I agree, Lena. Well said. Eve said stress is a big issue right now for all companies, and she's like, not just the mental piece, but the physical health, like you were talking about a minute ago, like those primary care visits and things tied to that. So there's a lot of data out there to back that up. So thank you everybody for chiming in, for your comments and everything else supporting this. Lindsay, if someone wants to learn more about Headspace for work, what's the best way to do that?
The best way to do that is actually go to headspace.com/WMHD, which stands for World Mental Health Day. October is World Mental Health Month, and we have a lot of resources for companies and individuals to just help, increase awareness inside of your organizations around mental health in the workplace. So I would go there, headspace.com/WMHD, and get a lot of free resources.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much for your time today.
Yeah,
I
of
really
course.
enjoyed
Yeah.
this. Maybe that skeptic comment was maybe a little bit me, but I think you've convinced me. I'm really giving this a try. It's been a fun discussion.
Good. Yeah, well, it was wonderful to connect, and thanks so much for having me.
Wonderful. All right. For everybody else, thank you guys for hanging out with us. I'm going to play the little outro, and we appreciate you for joining us for the discussion today, and we will catch you next time.